Welcome, everyone. My name is Michael S. Seaberg. You're listening to Equal Chance to be Unequal, my podcast about unlocking human potential through helping people disconnected from their purpose uncover and live their purpose. So thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming this morning. Back in April, I was able to talk a little bit about, was it engaging millennials? I think it was the millennials, right? Which is a super fun.
I remember you.
You're like, I've seen that face before. Maybe it's all the gray hair.
Okay.
But somehow or another, having the chance to be able to talk about millennials, which is a very, very interesting topic, probably because they're such an incredibly large part of our society now, right? They're the biggest percentage of the American workforce. By 2025, they're going to be 75% of the American workforce. So all of the things that they're doing to impact our world, very, very important to recognize and to understand. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, take a good look at some of that content and material about how they're shaping the workforce, because they certainly are. And one of the ways I think that they're shaping the workforce is, go ahead, Roy, is that they're really getting us to think differently about the way that we utilize our personal brands. And what I mean by that is that more experienced folks, when they left college, most of the time some sort of a corporation took care of them for long periods of time. So they were able to stay employed by the same organization for quite some time. Now, unfortunately, that world does not exist anymore. Cradle-to-grave employment died a number of years back. So we're now in a place where we somewhat have to emulate some of the things that millennials do, which is instead of giving their personal brand to a company, they've created their own personal brand and they leverage that first. So more experienced generations say, hey, I'm going to just let the company take care of me. Younger folks are a little bit more self-interested, I would say, and say, hey, here's my personal brand and I'm going to push this out to the marketplace. So what I'm going to share with you today is the branding process that I put all of the executives that I serve through. And it's typically done 3, 6, or 12 months. So I want to walk you through that process. We'll talk a little bit about some things that I'm seeing changing in society, talk a little bit about the brand process that I put executives through, the 8 factors that I use in decision making. So as you think about opportunities that are coming your way, what would you potentially consider? And then what do we do to take this to action really, really quickly? So one big thing for me, and I just heard Roy mention this a second ago, is this idea that entrepreneurship or becoming a contractor is very, very critical. Have you guys seen this as well? So it's been a big, big adjustment in our world where we can have full-time jobs, but there's also value in us considering ourselves as entrepreneurs, having part-time jobs, the way that we engage professional associations like PMI, things we do with alumni associations, things we do with faith-based institutions. There's all these places, right, where we need to be able to have a brand and push it out into the marketplace. And so if you've seen anything in Metro Phoenix, potentially Seed Spot or Galvanize or the hashtag Yes Phoenix movement, CEI, Arizona State has a number of incubators. Right, there's about 6.7 million people in Arizona, and I believe there's about 520,000 small businesses as of, I think, last month. So there's a really big shift towards people working for very, very large businesses towards moving for themselves or for smaller to medium-sized businesses, and we have to be very, very aware of that. I also look at entrepreneurship as a very, very interesting way for us to learn a lot about ourselves, our emotional intelligence, how do we add value to other people, how do we become very, very empathetic. If you haven't looked at or heard of Stanford's D School or an organization called IDEO, they do a lot of work in partnership to help people think about something called design thinking, which is very important in the work that I do. Another thing that I'm seeing an awful lot of, and I think you probably have this too, is that our society is much, much more accepting of people making mistakes now than we ever were before. Has anybody heard of or read any of Brené Brown's work? The book is called Daring Greatly. So there's some great work. Actually, Brené has a couple of TED Talks. I would encourage you to go to TED.com and look at those TED Talks, because she talks an awful lot about how humans need vulnerability basically to have very, very meaningful connections to people and to avoid shame in some context or purpose. So when we think about being vulnerable, when we think about being empathetic, when we think about being a friend to somebody or being a colleague to somebody, we're moving to a place where mistakes are actually a good thing because we can learn from them very, very quickly and very rapidly, and that's important. If you haven't heard of an organization called Google X, the director of it, his name is Astro Teller. It's a very, very interesting name. But the reason why his name is Astro, or he goes by Astro, is that when he was young, he had a flat top, and everybody said that it looked like AstroTurf. So he ended up getting the name Astro, even though it's not his real name. But the reason I bring him up is he also has a very, very good TED Talk. And what he talks an awful lot about within Google X is that they celebrate mistakes. So when a very, very big thing goes wrong, they throw parties with cakes and balloons and streamers and all that fun stuff. Now, in PMI land, that sounds silly, right? But it's actually a very, very interesting approach to talking about people taking risks and finding ways to think of their own personal brand, to share that with the universe around them. So in Astro's world, right, we're moving to a place where mistakes are good because they help us learn and they help us uncover more pieces of our brand in ways that we might not have. Okay? Now, similarly to this, I think individuality is the third thing here that I'm seeing a lot change in our society. I just mentioned how millennials have changed that game a little bit. But when you think about what has happened in our world, right, for the first time ever, there was an African American president. There was a female who was actively considered to become president in Arizona. Right now, about 58% of Arizona's population is Caucasian or connected to Caucasian, and about 29% is Hispanic. But we're moving to a place where in 2025, that's basically the Hispanic population is going to pass and surpass the Caucasian population here. So we have this environment where things are changing very, very rapidly. And so we have to become very, very good at interfacing with people that are from very, very different backgrounds than maybe what we have come from. And so many of you have probably lived in different locations or have traveled around to different countries or different cities. In every single place that you go, there's some commonality in terms of people are human, right? They do the same thing each day. But what's really critical is understanding that the way that their environment shapes them is really more of a determinant than the content of his or her character, right? It's called the fundamental attribution error, which you look up at another time. But it's just really, really important to understand that we're moving to a place where the individual and what he or she can do for the community is very important. And so if we don't know what our own value proposition is or what our own personal brand is, it's very, very hard to share that. So there's a lot of things happening from entrepreneurship, from it's okay to make mistakes, to individuality and difference and respect for that diversity. We have to be okay with that in some context. Are you guys seeing anything else, big changes in society that you think we should talk about?
Automation.
So automation of processes and robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, those are big things that are impacting your work and a lot of finance and accounting work. So good one.
Lack of one-on-one communication.
Okay.
More phones, emails.
There's definitely a lot of that. So younger generations have propensities to want to be able to communicate through social media or some sort of text. So we're seeing less in certain cases of the face-to-face stuff, and we want to get back to a place where that actually happens, right? Because that's really what is most meaningful. There's another great TED Talk by a guy named Robert Waldinger, and he runs something called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And for 80 plus years, they've been tracking groups of people to assess what leads to a long, happy, and healthy life. And it's not power, money, fame, success, all that stuff. It's actually just the quality of your close-knit relationships. And so we've had this place in society where we've been moving to using social media or text messaging or more electronic means, as opposed to going back to what's critical, which is close-knit relationships. Okay, so automation, relationships are somehow maybe not having enough of that in person. What else?
We want more location diversity.
Okay.
Companies aren't just one location, they're all over the world.
Yep. Very good point. Yeah, so location diversity is a very, very important thing where one person could be his or her own business, or these larger businesses have locations in lots of different countries and or cities. And so we do have a lot of people working from home, and we're changing that dynamic, which is a good one. I think you had something too, Mike?
Yeah, how we get our information has changed quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, we used to, for a very, very long period of time, receive information via the K through 12 school system, undergraduate degrees, master's degrees, whatever it might be. We no longer need to do that in order to be successful. And I'm the guy that spent $100,000 on an MBA, so I get that, right? So I look back at that and I'm very, very thankful for that experience, but I also somewhat regret it because it was such a huge financial investment, and the ROI today isn't there the same way that it was 10 years ago. Because, go ahead.
I somewhat disagree with that in that I'm looking for a job right now, and it's one an MBA, one an MBA, one an MBA. So if you didn't invest in that, there is a downside.
Sure.
So
Potentially.
congratulations for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that. So there are going to be certain companies and scenarios or situations where they try to weed people out because they have so many applicants, so they put those things in there, and I get that. But you can go to the University of Illinois, Arizona State, WP Carey, MIT. They all have all of their MBA material online free. You can get the degree free. You don't have to pay. You honestly do not have to pay. Go to their websites. So if you really, really, really want the knowledge, you can get complete and total knowledge free. You don't have to pay. But back in 2008, 2010, when I was finishing my degree, that didn't exist, right? The dynamics in our world were very, very different then. We just happen to live in a place right now where we can get information through lynda.com, through Coursera, through Udacity, through other massive open online courses. It becomes very easy to collect information and certifications, right? It's just there. So we're learning definitely very differently. So good one. Anybody else?
Not only that, but which may be more what you're thinking about, is the day-to-day, so that's formal education, but the informal day-to-day news. It used to be newspapers, magazines, and Walter Cronkite.
Yeah.
to age myself. But,
No, that's good. That's good.
I remember him.
Yes. But nowadays it's social media and Twitter and everything else.
Yeah.
So it's a huge shift in how, and maybe more so how it's filtered. I guess I would say.
Yeah.
That as it comes to us. So.
The algorithms that run Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, all of that really does shape the things that you see and experience and feel. So we do have to be cognizant of that. Just so you guys are aware, I think it was HubSpot did some studies and looking at what percent of millennials believe corporate advertising, and the number is less than 16%. Right? So why spend a bunch of money if you're a big company on advertisements and things where you know that the audience is not going to believe them? So we're just in a world where we have reviews on Yelp, and you can go to Glassdoor, and you can go to other peer review sites to be able to get very, very meaningful information from people just like you. So you don't have to believe this corporate stuff that's just pure messaging to get you to buy a product. You go to other people who are like you, and you can get that more in the grassroots kind of feel to say, okay, this is what's actually going to happen. So Chris is right? We don't believe the corporate advertising because we know its purpose is to sell product. What we want is relationships with people, so we go from the grassroots up. Okay, so good point, Chris. Okay. So here is a very, very basic overview of how I help executives. And so the left-hand side is kind of the discovery phase for me. And so what I ask them to do is complete a DISC assessment. Has anybody done DISC, Myers-Briggs, StrengthsFinder? Okay, many of you have done that. That's good. So I asked them to do a version of the DISC. The 12 driving forces that Roy mentioned earlier is basically what motivates you or your values. So motivators and values. And then I put them through a Q&A process. So I give them assessments to assess communication preference and what motivates them and their values. But then I ask them about 3 to 4 hours of Q&A about their past, their present, and their future, which is a lot of information. So once I have them, kind of the nature and nurture sides of who they are, I can then distill that information down to probably 6, 7, or 8 patterns about that person's life. Right? What are the things that have always been true for them? What are the challenges that they endured when they were young? Or how much time did they spend with their family? Or did they have a specific hobby? Right? There's all these things that actually shape our personal brand that our society just hasn't talked about yet. So collect the information, put that into 6, 7, 8 themes about that person's life, and then use those themes to draft these 3 statements, right? So it becomes very, very simple for us to know what to do next. So the intention is a person's mission, ambition are basically their goals, and the value proposition is what's commonly referred to as a personal brand. Okay, so we'll talk about each of those things in a bit more depth. Go ahead, Ray. Here is a basic overlay. Has anybody ever seen a chart like this if you've done the DISC? A couple of you have? Okay, so I'm always looking very, very succinctly at a lot of information. So if I can see where a person falls on this chart, I can take into consideration a lot of things about what is interesting for that person. So just because this person happens to fall down here, one of the things that I'm always looking for are a couple of things. Number one is what is his or her default fear, and what is their conflict style. Right, so you can see that this person's default fear is being rejected socially. So I know that that's going to drive his or her behavior. And what is their style under negotiation or conflict? In this case, they happen to like to collaborate. So these people happen to be very, very good in business development, in sales, in marketing or advertising type roles. But people over here, not so much. Okay, so these folks being a bit more introverted, they're far, far better at finance, accounting, maybe some PMI work. But it's just, I need to know these things about the person to help guide their behavior moving forward. Because I can know their default emotion under stress. I know what their fears are. I know how they prefer to deal with conflict. I know if they view themselves as more powerful than the environment. Do they view the environment favorably? Is their brain hardwired to want to think that the world's going to help them or hurt them? Do you guys ever think about or have experienced in your own life where as soon as a situation occurs, your brain automatically goes to, oh my gosh, that's going to affect me negatively? Right? So the brain is hardwired, the old fight or flight response around how do we protect ourselves? How do we mitigate risks? So people who are in this area, their brain thinks that way more than people that are down in this area. This people down here, they think that the world is out to help them. Right? They think that the world is their oyster. So now I can help to shape what types of positions they might be interested in if I know where their brain falls on this spectrum. Does that make sense? Pretty straightforward? Okay. All right, Roy, want to go to the next one? So here are the 12 driving forces. I'm not going to go to them all in depth, but I'll point out a couple. So a couple of things to be very, very cognizant of is, again, this is the why of human communication. This is why you do what you do. At the end of the day, these are the things that you really care about. So as an example, over here where it says resourceful, people who are motivated by resourcefulness, they love to create wealth. They want to make a lot of money. They like to be efficient in business and set up systems so that they can make money. So if a person's really, really heavily motivated by wealth, should they be working in a not-for-profit? No. Okay, pretty straightforward, pretty simple. But many times I'll work with executives and they'll be motivated by this, but then they'll be working in a not-for-profit and they'll be very unhappy. Now you know why. But they didn't know that about themselves. They couldn't understand or figure that out. Okay? So similarly, one down here is called commanding. So commanding is people who really enjoy two things: power or control over their own destiny. So if a person is in a really, really massively large business and their employee number 500 on the rank, do you think they're going to be happy? They're just not going to be happy, right? They're not going to be engaged. And Gallup, I think it was just this past week, put out a new State of the American Workforce report. I would really, really encourage you to go look at it. I haven't read it myself, but if you want to know what engages the American workforce, that report is, 500 or 600 pages of what that looks like. You obviously don't have to read the whole thing. But on average, in America, only 30 to 34% of people are engaged by or actually like their work. Okay, so it's a very, very low percentage. And the reason why is that these things, the communication, the why, the motivators, they're not lined up with what the person's doing at their job. So they need to be lined up. Another quick example here, this one down here is called receptive. These are people who love entrepreneurial thinking. They love new ideas, they love changing environments, they love things that are very innovative and creative. So if you take a receptive person and you put them in a government contracting job where everything is purely rule following, are they going to be happy? They're just not going to be happy. But people haven't taken the time to dive into understanding these things about themselves so that when they go out and pitch their personal brand to a company, it's very well aligned with what they're about ready to do. And they should. Instead, they're trying to go out and say, hey, these are the things that I've done, or these are the certifications that I have. And that's important to a certain point. But here we can go one level deeper and truly help them to pitch themselves well. Okay? So another thing that I look at is, these are just a list of about 60 different human values. You don't have to, and Roy, you're welcome to send this out to everybody if you would like to look at it at a later place. You're more than welcome to. What I normally do with the executive when I give them a sheet of these 60 values is I ask them to whittle the list down to their top 10. Okay, let them sit on that for about 30 seconds, 60 seconds. Then I say, cut it in half, give me your top 5. Okay, let them sit on that for a bit and think about it, and then say, give me your top 3. Right? So it's a process of whittling down what are the things that are actually really super meaningful to you, because knowing what a person's values are, we can align his or her values with the mission statement or the values of the company that they're trying to go work for. Does that make sense? Because that's probably one of the most critical things that I see mistakes being made around with executives, is that what they end up doing is they just go take a job because there's money there. And that's nice, don't get me wrong, money's important, but it's not everything. And so what we can do is we can say, what kind of communication style do I want to have? What motivates me? What are my values? And how do I align those with the company and their mission and their values and what they need from me in terms of communication style? So it's a slightly different approach, but it's more about pairing to make sure that the relationship is very strong. So again, taking this list of 60 down to 10, down to 5, down to 3, because then we can build that value into what it is that the person's going to choose to do next. So after we've done a little bit of that process, here's the beginning of the Q&A that I was referencing. And so like I said, this process normally takes quite a bit of time. And some of these questions seem a little bit kind of silly, but they actually have very, very defined purpose. So I'm asking them essentially 9 or 10 questions about their past. And I'm typically focused in on age range 15 to say 28 or 30. And there's a very specific reason. Has anybody here heard the term quarter life crisis? Midlife crisis? Okay, you guys have heard that one. Okay. So quarter life crisis hasn't really been discussed much in Western society, more so in Eastern methodology in society. The quarter life crisis is between age 28 and 30. All humans go through a very, very significant adjustment and change. And if you really think back to your own lives at 28 or 30 or 48 and 50, right, quarter life crisis, midlife crisis, something in your life probably changed. Right? I don't know what it is, but something adjusted. Now for me, it happened to be my wife left me and she took some money, she took the house, and I started the MBA at Thunderbird all in the same week, which was I was 28. It was really a fun experience. I'm super thankful that it happened. And so she and I are now good friends right after a few years of just kind of settling down. We've become good friends again, which is fantastic. And I appreciate her now because of the woman she is and how she helped me through bad stuff that I was going through. So I'm very thankful for her for that. So what I'm doing when I'm asking executives these questions is I'm looking for those patterns. Okay, and I'm really, really looking specifically on the most difficult experience and the perceived problems that recur. Because between age 15 and 30, we all have very, very specific challenges that we go through. And there's a pattern to it. But the problem is that many people don't recognize or journal or keep an eye on what those challenges were. Now, the reason why those two questions are so critical is because I'm a big fan of something called be the person you needed when you were younger. So I think that a person's life's mission is helping other people overcome the exact same challenge that they went through when they were younger. Okay? So the challenges that you went through between age 15 and 30, write those things down, and then after age 30, the highest and best use of your time, what your brand is going to be built on, is helping other people overcome that exact same challenge. Because I guarantee other people are going to have it. Okay, does that make sense? It's a little bit different, right? Have you guys ever heard it that way? No, it's pretty new. So when I was young, my father still to this day has a landscaping and lawn maintenance company back in Michigan. And that's where I was raised, spent most of my life there. And my father was never really truly able to become a father. He was a great boss, but he really would struggle with the dad thing because his dad never taught him how. And that's okay, he just never did. So I always became one of the employees. I was never a son, I was always one of the employees. And I was always very disengaged by that. He and I had different ways of showing appreciation to one another, so there was always that disconnect. So I always felt very disengaged, and I've always felt like just one of the crowd. So it's not a secret or a surprise that what I do today is help people become engaged, and I help them become very unique versions of themselves, because that's exactly what I didn't have when I was a kid. Okay? So I want you to think about that for yourselves and to say, what was the challenge that I went through? How did I overcome it? How am I now working through the process of helping other people experience that same thing? Because we all have it. Okay? So here are the past questions, and whenever you can, maybe over the weekend in the next couple of weeks, answer these questions for yourselves, right? And really, really look at them and say, what are the patterns here? So then after we ask about the past, we now come to the present. And I'm asking a series of questions here, say, of the job that you're doing today, or of the tasks and things that you complete today, what are the top 3 that interest you the most? Right? Not where you're spending your time per se, but what are the 3 things that you care about and are most interested in and want to devote the most time to? Right? There's likely part of your job or part of your process that is that, so we just have to figure out what that is and assess it. So I want to know that. Do you like where the location of your office is? Would you rather it be somewhere else? How much are you actually getting paid? Not just base wage, but also extra benefits and things along those lines, because maybe there's room for growth there. What are the 3 or 4 or 5 tasks that you actually spend your time on each day? Not that you wish you could, right, but that you actually spend your time on, because there's likely some disengagement there that we have to address or try to figure out. Because if a person's spending time on things that are not interesting to them, we got to figure out a way to make that different. Do they have appropriate responsibility level, meaning do they have a number of team members? Do they have a specific budget? Right? What does that stuff look like? Because is it what they would like, or do they want more? And within their current job, how much potential do they actually have for growth? Because in many cases, we might not have the right growth opportunities that we wish we had. So I'm trying to create a baseline of where we're at today by asking these questions more tactically about what they're doing. So then I ask very, very similar questions after choosing a date 3, 4, 5 years into the future. Right? So by 2020 or 2021, here is what I would like to be doing in each of these things. Okay? Are we moving closer to the office? Are we making more money? Are we spending time on tasks that we actually care about? Do we have more budget, more people, more responsibility? Do we have the capacity for growth? Right? And trying to set the baseline in the present and saying, here's where we're going to go in the future. Right? Because in the gap, that's where I can plug in and help. Because if I know what the goals are, then I can work back month by month to today and create little milestones and goals to get them to those goals. Right? I know you guys get this at a really basic level. It's whether or not you've ever done it for yourself. Have you guys ever done anything like this for yourself? About your personal brand? About your own goals? Not yet? Mike's like, maybe a little bit. So Mike has a little...
One away, right, as part of this breakfast? You're going to take
maybe.
Might be.
Kimberly is on it. I totally appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. So again, baseline, where are we going? What's the gap? How do I plug in and help? Go ahead, Roy. So once we've got that information, now I'm starting to write these 3 statements that I referenced earlier: intention, ambition, value proposition. So the intention is just really, really basically a mission statement, right? This is the thing about your life that should never change. Your statement, this mission statement, should always be the same for the rest of your life. And if you ever struggle with this, I can email you some examples, or you can go to missionstatements.com, and the Fortune 500 companies' mission statements are there. So if you look at those challenges and those things that you experience and those patterns that I talked about, you should be able to draft a very quick 1-sentence statement that would help you to make decisions, because we're making very, very tough decisions based on your why. So if you have 3 or 4 job opportunities coming your way, we want to pick the one that is most connected to your purpose, your mission, this statement. Because that's the thing that's going to motivate you the most, that's going to engage you the most, it's going to matter the most to you long term. So we want to make sure that our intention statement is very honest and true to who we are. Okay, does anybody have a mission per se? Maybe one that you've written down, things you've been trying to think about? Not yet? Maybe after this session we will. Right? Each of you might just take some time to write up this stuff.
What's
So
yours?
mine is that I exist to unlock human potential through the development of personal and professional well-being. Right? It's very simple. But the point is, the reason why I brought that up is that unlocking human potential can happen in a lot of different ways. Right? I can speak, I can blog, I can podcast, I can write, I can coach one-to-one, I can train groups. There's all these different ways that unlocking potential happens. I can start my own university, right? There's so many ways. But the more important piece to me is the personal and professional well-being happening at the same time. As I mentioned, right, my childhood wasn't the greatest in terms of my dad being able to separate the two. So when I coach people, I get into their personal life and their professional life at the same time. So that could mean meeting with the spouse, that could mean taking time to hang out with their kids, that could mean going to their events very personally. It depends, but I have to be engaged in both at the same time to truly fix things, right? To get them where they want to, because what's happening at home definitely determines their success at work and vice versa. I can't tell you how many times the husband or the wife has been limiting my client's potential at work because of the things that they do and say at home, right? So I'll get called to go to the house to have dinner, and then I'll be sitting there trying to figure out, okay, why is the wife or the husband thinking the way that they're thinking? Once I can assess and figure it out, then I can create a plan for managing the spouse. Right? The same way that we manage up to a leader in our organization, we use the same methodologies and tactics in managing the spouse. So much fun, guys. I mean, realize I've seen and heard some stuff, right? That it's a little bit more than, it's kind of rated R type stuff, and I don't want to talk about it too much. But I have seen and heard some stuff. But it's been fun because the most important thing to remember about humanity is that wherever there's reactivity today, if there's something very, very emotional to a person today, that is all based on some wound that happened to them at some point in their past. So all of the emotional stuff that you see coming from a person today is is not really important as much as finding out what triggered that from some point in their past. So I can use neuro-linguistic programming techniques to go back to that past point and try to wipe it clean off the person's memory so that they don't feel that same sense of response today. Because again, where there's reactivity, there's a wound. So forget the reactivity, where's the wound? How do we fix that? Because that's what matters more.
That's pretty hard to fix, isn't it?
Not really.
To get rid of that wound?
No.
I mean, if they've had it for 30, 40 years.
Yeah, can it be difficult? Yes. I won't take that away from you. I'm just saying that there are now techniques that we have discovered as humans that can make those things disappear. So whether it's through psychiatry, whether it's through psychology, neuro-linguistic programming, those little things matter a lot in getting us to accept, forgive, and forget whatever that thing was, and to just see that it's a data point in a very long journey, right? Because all those events they're minor data points. The human brain irrationally creates a lot of extra meaning for things that don't require all that extra meaning. But we just have to learn that. We just haven't done a good job of that as a species, is we get all worked up about how that thing is going to affect us, as opposed to just looking at it as a small data point in building our brand to what it is today. So the second one, the ambition statement, this is what I refer to as a personal vision. And has anybody heard of the 4 disciplines of execution from Chris McChesney or Franklin Covey? You probably heard of SMART goals, right? So you guys have dealt with SMART goals. It's similar methodology, but they have a very, very in-depth approach. And so I use McChesney's work to create goals that are from X to Y by when, right? So X and Y can be adjusted and changed, and when, the date that you choose to achieve it by, is up to you. So I work with executives to make sure that we have 3 or more from X to Y by when goals for themselves. Okay, do they have to apply to the SMART methodology and have it plug in and fit? Yes. But what's really critical is that we choose personal and professional goals. Right? Personal could be, I want to finish the MBA, or I want to have children, or I want to get married, or I want to move to a different city. Right? The goal is up to the person. As long as it aligns with his or her mission, that's what matters. Now, professional goals could be, I want to make more money, or I want to get a different job, or I want to gain a certification, right? Whatever it is really important to that person. I'll help them develop a plan around it. I want you to consider this for yourself. Right? So the ambition, set those goals, because if you have something to strive for, it helps you to think about the decisions that you're making today to get to that point. Okay? Questions there? Make sense? All right, go ahead, Roy. And then the last one, the personal brand, the value proposition. This is something that Mike and I, when I first sat down, talked about just briefly. We have to have something, some statement that shows the 6, 7, 8 things that make you different and unique, that show it. Now, it can go at the top of your resume, it can go at the summary section of your LinkedIn profile, it can go in what you say to other people. There's so many places that we can utilize this, but we have to know exactly what those things are. Okay, it becomes very, very easy to think about that in that context. Okay, so can you take all of those patterns and themes that I've referenced, and can you write 3 to 5 sentences that can be placed in all of these various places about who you are? So yes, you have certifications, you have specific hard skills, and you have specific soft skills, but how do you language it and word it in such a way that people automatically get it, right? So we need to be very, very good at taking another person's perspective or allowing them to validate back to us what it is we're saying to them, and writing statements like this in such a way that people automatically can understand what we're doing to add value to them. It's very important. Okay, so we're just in a place where if we write this statement, put it in these documents, very easy for people to see how we can add value to their organization, especially if all of these statements align with the organization's mission, their vision, their core values. So the tighter those things are, the tighter your options and opportunities are within that business. So again, this is kind of the all-in-one here. Has anybody done the 5 love languages quiz? A couple of you have. It's a free quiz. I would encourage you to take it. It's not even so much it's like a romantic quiz. I don't even think of it as that, although it can be construed as such. The 5 love languages is looking at how do you prefer to receive and give appreciation. Right? One of the most human elements is that we have to feel appreciated for the work that we're doing. So recognize what your style might be, and then figure out the other persons in your life and what they might be. Now, one of the reasons why my dad and I were always so disconnected was that he prefers to show and give love through gifts. And I'm a words of affirmation guy. So all he had to say was, I love you. But what he was doing was all constantly offering gifts, which is great. But I didn't understand that that's what he was doing. Okay, so it's really important that we think about that. How do we want to receive appreciation? How are we giving it in a way that the person we're with can receive it, right? In a way that it lands with them. So I want to know his or her love languages. I want to know his or her DISC profile, the 12 driving forces. What are those patterns that really have shaped the person into who they are today? And then, of course, we want to write these statements, because now once I've got all of these things together, I've got a very, very good look at how to connect the person to the job he or she might be interested in. Okay, so the decisions, right, there's basically these 8 factors kind of on the previous slide, but also here, is that what I'll do is I'll create a form that has these 8 factors down the left-hand side on a vertical axis, and then I'll have 3 or more opportunities that the person's considering, and I'll just go right down that column and say, okay, how does this opportunity match up with these things for that person? And whichever one of the opportunities matches the best or achieves that person's goals the best for those 3 to 4 year goals, that's the opportunity that we need to take. Okay, so it's an intuitive yet kind of logical linear approach to people choosing and making very, very tough decisions. I'm just a bigger fan of making sure that the job or the opportunity really aligns well with these things more than anything else. These things can make you really disengaged at work, but these are the things that can make you the happiest. So we got to make sure that we have good, solid statements, and that we find ways to connect them to the job that we're interested in. So everybody needs a dog like that. That's a good-looking dog. Anybody have a dog? Yeah, a couple of you? Okay, good. So again, I've already referenced the resume and the LinkedIn piece already a little bit. So once you've written these statements, I would encourage you to go back and look at the summary section of your resume, of LinkedIn, of any other social media that you use. Do many of you use other social media besides LinkedIn? Not yet? Are we going to consider it? Chris?
Well, just Facebook, but not for really professional
Okay.
stuff.
Anybody else? Not yet? Is there no value for it in terms of job search or trying to find what's next for you?
You talking about like Angels List or something?
Twitter, Google+, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I didn't know if you guys used any of that.
Well, not professionally.
Okay.
It all takes so much time.
It does.
Right?
Yeah.
To maintain and keep up with it. So I think it's hard to
They're also,
manage.
many of them are very limited. If you're not following the right things, or you're not finding the right people to follow you, because there's so many people out there with multiple accounts, and there's the bots and everything else. Go back to the communication point, you're forgetting. Look, that's the other one. How do you decipher between what's real? You know, the Clifford Still point. What's data? What's information?
Yeah. That's
What's
it.
silicon snake oil? Go back 20 years. When the internet was born, it becomes a whole other part of how much do you use versus your strategy.
Yeah.
Stupid, I'm not gonna do things. I've been reanalyzing all that last year.
Yeah, and good for that, right? Good for you for doing that, because those are the things that matter, right? So when you think about how to share your brand with as many people as possible, I shared a little bit earlier that the average millennial is less interested in just receiving the regular corporate message. So if you want to be part of that grassroots campaign, you might want to consider opening up a few of those other social media channels and figure out a way to share your message via them, because you never know who's going to pick it up. So there's a big change and difference between push and pull marketing. Push is the corporate entity pushing a message down. We're now in a world of pull marketing, right, where we have to share the message with a very, very diverse base and allow it get to pulled back up to the corporate folks so that they can make their decision. Okay, so it's just important to recognize that difference in the value. So resume, LinkedIn, we won't go too much in depth because Roy's going to pull me off stage. But tailoring communication to the other person is so incredibly important. So being a great active listener and sharing your brand, let the other person talk for 2 or 3 minutes and then give you a chance to customize your delivery of what your personal brand statement is. Very critical. If you haven't looked at the meaning behind color, take a look at Sally Hogshead's website called How to Fascinate. It's a free quiz that allows you to learn a little bit about yourself, but then it assigns a color. So if you happen to be very much into trustworthiness or confidence or competence or something like that, then blue is your color. If you're very interested in things that are modern or your values align with being contemporary, then gray and or black is your color. So what I'm suggesting is that once you know your values by going through this process, you then start wearing more of that color, or you put that color on your resume, or you put that color in your LinkedIn profile, and that becomes a better part of your personal brand. Same thing with body language. Body language is a very, very big one. Amy Cuddy has a great TED Talk about how your power poses can actually help you drop cortisol and increase testosterone so that you don't feel anxiety going in and doing work. So something to consider there. Building trust, we already talked about branding. I'm just a big fan of generating value. And what I mean by this is that you should always do 3 nice things for a person before you ever ask for anything in return from them. So I just use the 3-to-1 rule, okay? So my goal after working through this entire process is to make all of these things happen for a person, right? They know their why, they can manage change more effectively because they're confident, they feel better overcoming their fears, they're more engaged in the community, they're productive, they perform, they communicate, they execute strategy better. But at the end of the day, what I care about most when developing a brand is that the person is being the person they needed when they were younger, right? Because that's where the engagement, that's where the happiness, that's where the real value comes from. Okay, so I know that in 40 minutes we talked through this stuff pretty quickly, and I appreciate your ear, but we talked about what are those things that are changing in society, and you guys had some really, really good examples around what that looks like. So there's clearly a lot of change happening. How do we manage it? And for me, the way to manage it is to go through that process I just described and define what your brand is so that you have power in the situation when you have to make those decisions. So now you've got that 8-step framework to say, if I can follow these 8 things, I now know what it is that I would have to do choosing 1 or 2 or 3 opportunities. Okay, and then the stuff around LinkedIn and color and branding, all that, definitely try to apply it. I've seen it work a lot with people. Okay, so down there it might be a little bit tough to see, but when you receive the slides, you can see it. But that's my contact information. You want to text me, you want to call me, you want to email me, please do. Right, if you want to take 30 minutes or so or 60 minutes or so to talk about these things in a little bit more depth, these are the things I'm struggling with. These is no cost to you, 30 minutes, let's just chat. Let's do it so that you guys feel comfortable with this content so that you're feeling better about pushing your brand out into the community so that you feel very, very good about whatever opportunities are coming your way. Sound good? Okay, thank you all for your time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Equal Chance to Be Unequal. I'm Michael S. Seaver. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and like, share, or comment on this podcast on michaelsseaver.com, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube. Go forth and be awesome.